That brings to order our Burlington Government Review Committee meeting of July 8th, 2020. Before we get started, I want to do a couple of things. One is I want to kind of take attendance so we know who's here. So if I call your name, could you just let me know you're here? Bill Byer?
Here.
Corey Everett?
Here?
Carl Foss? Okay. Craig Foster? Oh, Craig is on a plane. Betsy Hughes, me. Nikki Cadillac?
I saw her name.
Thought I saw- Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Stephen Mahoney?
Here?
Russell Minor?
Here.
Jess Sutherland?
Here.
Jack Kelly, our alternate.
Here.
Myrna Saltman? She's probably on the concert listening to the music.
She does not do online, so she's not here.
Don't forget.
And Nick Priest, our liaison to the select board.
Here.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, we do have a quorum, so that is great. First, before I get started on anything, I want to thank Sally Willard, who has volunteered to work with this committee in a technical capacity. She's already started a Facebook page for us, which is great, and it will be growing over time. And when we get into communications, which is a topic we'll talk about later, at least we have the beginning of a platform. And she's also agreed to be our tech wizard, resident tech wizard during the meetings, and Patrick will do it when Sally can't. So thank you, Sally. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, since the last time we met, we've had a number of discussions. Jess and I have had discussions with our friends at the Collins Center, and we've also had discussions with other members of this board to kind of, and we heard feedback about the fact that we have people on this board who this is the first time they've done anything in government in Burlington and really are starting at a zero knowledge level, other than just being a resident and experiencing government. And then we have people who've had very senior positions on boards and committees or in elected roles within the community. So the knowledge base is really disparate. And so what we found is that some people understood everything that was being said at the last meeting, and some people had no clue what we were talking about. So what we thought a good place to start would be to kind of level set. So I'm going to take a few minutes and run through some things that for some of you may be a lightning bolt to the obvious, but for others of you will be new information. It's going to be kind of high level stuff, and when we come to the detail, Pat and Anthony will probably get into that, but I just want to start there. So I was asked after the meeting, why are we doing this? I mean, and the reason is because this is actually, and it's not clicking. Let's try that one. No, it's not advancing. Did you do that?
I did.
Okay, so could I have the mouse, because I didn't need to do that. I don't know why it's not working on the, no. Thank you. Which one did I push?
The left one.
Okay. Anyhow, when I was asked what we were doing, it was actually a recommendation. In 2018, in January, there was a committee formed to take a look at the government review. And in August, they came through with a report, and among other things, they made recommendations, some of which will sound really familiar to you. But of the 6 things that they suggested, it was like take a look at the town manager versus administrator, take a look at personnel and management responsibilities and reporting structures, and then involve a third-party independent group, i.e. for us now, the Collins Center, to help in all of that. So our mission as a committee, and Sally, which one did you push?
The left button.
There. Our missions committee, and we saw this before, but I thought I'd just highlight the high level, is that what our mission that the Select Board has given us is to ensure appropriate, effective, accountable organizational structure of Burlington for its residents and constituents. And to do that, we've been given 6 very specific tests. The first starts out with the process. And the process is that we're supposed to, and this is a lot of words on the page, and I apologize for that, but there are 6 items that we've been asked for to do. And it goes through, we want to seek out input from people in the town and in the current government. We want to benchmark best practice in similar communities. We want to produce a charter for the town. And while we're at it, we're going to look at the town administrator role and consider new provisions like recall or referendums or that sort of thing. And when after we've gone through all of that, we're going to write a report. So what will we be doing? Well, we're going to take a deep dive. And the first thing we're going to do is study, really look at the effectiveness of the town's form of government and the processes that we have. We're going to engage stakeholders, and that includes employees, volunteers. We're using that as a generic word, but that means people like us, people who are on town committees, town meeting, et cetera, and residents in understanding what's working and what's not. We're going to benchmark the different models for government in comparable communities to see what they've done and how they've structured it and get a sense of what they think is good and what's not. And we're going to identify the strengths and weaknesses in our current structure and processes and make some changes. And through this process, we're going to facilitate the public's engagement in that. So BCAT's one of that. We're actually going to make the committee recordings available. Minutes obviously wouldn't be available at all. And then finally, we're going to develop a charter and a bylaw changes that reflect the recommendations. But before we jump into that, let's start with some real basics, because when we talked about charter at the last meeting, many people had different definitions for what is a charter, depending on where you came from. So I didn't look at it, for example, as a government person. I looked at it as, in my company, when we had charter, what does that mean? And it didn't mean the same thing as what everybody else was talking about. So I thought, okay, let's take a look. And according to the Mass General Law, simply put, this is how they define a charter, which is just a written instrument that will define the structure under which we operate, create local offices, distribute powers, et cetera, and to define certain procedures, et cetera, in that. Now, our friends at the Collins Center are going to go in a lot more detail on that, but just to make sure that we have a general understanding about what that word charter means, that's where we're going to start. In terms of the forms of government, there are 4 basic forms of government. And again, I'm actually, as you know, I sent everybody out a copy of the report that Natick did, which Jess and I thought were really helpful in helping us understand this project, and hopefully you all had a chance to read it. But they had some graphics, this being one, and I apologize to the Select Board because they are obviously not as forward-thinking as we are, and they still call them selectmen, but where they identify basically 4 forms of government in Massachusetts, and there are a few nuances on this, but in essence, this is, I think, a really good summary to kind of get everybody's head into what they are. Some towns have open town meeting where everybody in the town's invited to go, and then they have a selectman or select board, and then some professional management. The second is having a representative town meeting with a board, select board, and professional management, which is what we have. And then you can have a town elected council with professional management, or an elected council with an elected mayor. So that's a very high level. That's in general the different forms of government in Massachusetts. Obviously, Burlington's number 2. So to change that, if we were to change that, there are 2 methods to change. The first is a charter commission, and the second is a special act. So let's take a look at each one, because again, this was new to me, and I'm not going to go through all the details, but the charter commission is more complicated. You have to go to the the voters and get 15% of them to petition the select board to place a question on the ballot, to establish a charter commission, and at the same time, you have to have the people identified who are going to be on the commission, and then when they get elected, then the charter commission has to go through that in a certain amount of time. They follow a specific process that the law establishes, they develop a new charter, and then the voters approve on it. So that is kind of a long process, and that's not what we're doing. So just, you don't really need to remember, but know that there are a couple of different ways you can do it. The second is special acts, and this is where we are, and this is one we're using. So the select board selected a committee, that's us, with drafting a new charter, and which is, as we talked about, which then will be brought to the select board and town meeting, and then it will, if it's approved at town meeting, the charter is submitted to the state legislature, and if approved there, then it has to go to the voters of the town. So it's a little bit more of a streamlined process. So now we are at step one, and it may feel like a formidable task. It certainly does to me, and you kind of say, well, where are we going to start? This is kind of a monster. Well, the strategy that we think works best is just taking things in manageable chunks, and so that's what we're planning on doing. And in order to do that, we've identified a 5-step process, which is probably similar to what many of you have used in your projects at work, but just in the essence, trying to keep everybody in the same place. So it starts with identifying the key components of the project, and we'll work with Collins Center. They're going to actually talk more about this when I'm through, but we'll get into more beef on that one. But just an example, just a couple of things that came to our minds as we were looking at this. Like, we need to understand the current structure. That would be one component. Another would be to assess the current state, what's working, what's not. And that might be stakeholder interviews. It might be surveys. It might be focus groups. There are a whole bunch of things, tasks that could happen. And then we need to analyze best practices. Well, how are you going to do that? There's going to be a comparable analysis, and that would be part of it, and pros and cons of each. And then, obviously, a communication strategy. So these are each different components of the project as we go along. Once we define those, we need to identify specific tasks. So again, just a few examples here so you know what it is that we're talking about. So it might be analyzing the current state. You'll need to have interviews with current employees. In order to do that, you probably have to have some sort of an instrument where everybody, if you're interviewing it and you have multiple people doing it, they're asking the same questions. So you need to develop a format for that. And if you're going to have a survey, you need to have a survey, but then you need to have a tool to analyze the results of it. So there's a software program, whether it's SurveyMonkey or whatever it is you're going to use to analyze it. So there are specific tasks that go along with each one of the components that we've talked about. And of course, once you have that, then you need to fit it into a project plan, which is the third step, which identifies the specific tasks, the timeframes, and the deliverables, so that we can keep ourselves on task. And once we do that, then we can specify where we need subcommittees. We will need some subcommittees for certain topics. Some of them are obvious at the moment, but others maybe not. So we need to establish what they are and then assign small subgroups to take on projects where they have skills, talent, desire, whatever it is that they want to do. And we'll break down the specific actions to be taken and identify the approaches. When you have a subgroup, they'll do all the research and come up with recommendations, but then they'll bring it back to the larger committee to share the results, and then the larger committee makes a decision, is that something that we support, not support, whatever. And then once we get to that point, the last step is we put it all together, again, in partnership with the Collins Center to identify, a high level, kind of what it is, what our recommendations are, et cetera. And then we present it to the select board and town meeting. That's a very high level of what we're going to do, and the Collins Center will help us through that process. But before we get there, I think it would be good to chat a little bit about how we're going to work together. There are many boards and committees, and not everybody operates the same way. Some are more casual, some more formal, et cetera. So Jess and I talked about this. We talked to John Denizio and others to kind of get a sense of what is actually required of us in terms of meeting format and what is optional. And so this is what our thoughts are. First, like many meetings, and I didn't do this tonight, shame on me, we're going to start with public comments and about things that are not on the agenda. And so we can make sure that if there's something that people have dialed in, or they want to make sure that we talk about at some point, it's 3 minutes, and then we will move on. We definitely want to encourage people to collaborate and have active discussions with actionable outcomes. When it comes to the formality, we're going to be inspired by Robert's rules, but we were not going to be specifically following them. So it's going to be a little bit more, because it's a working committee, it's going to be a bit more casual than some of the boards. We're going to get into some discussion topics that are really interesting, but maybe a little bit off task or a little bit off what it is we're specifically talking about. When that happens, we're going to put those on a list in what we're going to call a parking lot. So like a parking lot, that's where you stick something, but you are going to come back at it. So like your car, you're not going to leave it there. You're going to come back. So before we leave each meeting, anything that's in the parking lot, we'll come back at it and decide, is this something we want to pursue? If so, we'll put an owner on it, and so we can kind of keep that moving. In terms of the process for the committee, and again, what we were thinking is that whoever the leader of the discussion topic is going to really determine how they want that to run. So if it's a presentation, maybe somebody says, hold the questions till the end. Or maybe somebody else might say, if you have a question, just jump in and ask it. Some may say, raise your hand. Some may say, jump in. Let's keep it more active. And in this subcommittees, for sure, it probably is going to be far more interactive that way. At the end of each agenda item, we're going to make sure we have action steps with dates and for completion. So we make sure that we are pretty tight in managing. We have a real challenge with this timeline, and we want to make sure we stay on task. And if there is a need for a vote, each member will go around to each member. I have an alphabetical list. We can go around to each member and ask if there's any final comment or vote, and ask for a vote at that time. As we go along, we're going to have to adjust this as necessary. This is kind of like a stake in the ground. This is kind of how we think might work well, and hopefully it will. But before I finish with what we ask of you all, Nick, is there anything I missed on this in terms of how we're operating?
Making sure I'm off mute. Betsy, I don't think so. I think that you really nailed a lot of this, and I really appreciate the presentation thus far. I will reiterate, right, as Betsy's kind of broken down here, this committee is very much a strategically led committee, right? And there are absolutely pieces that, are going to break down into the operational working groups, which is going to be super important, right? I did want to clarify, and I think we started to via email, but clarify the role of our alternates. That word always evades me. I apologize. So I think that we started to define it in the last meeting, that they are non-voting members but can absolutely participate. We then wanted to further clarify that they are intended to only replace committee members when that committee member is resigning or leaving the committee, and that they will not count toward quorum during a standard meeting. So I just want to make sure that we're all clear on the same page on that. And I think as we come up with other questions, we can always answer them. But again, amazing start. I love where everything's at right now, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next is kind of like, as a team member, what are we asking for you? First thing, very important, we need you to get sworn in, and we need you to sign the open meeting. There's apparently a 2025 update to the open meeting law that Jennifer Priest told me that she just received. So if everybody could make sure they get in touch with Jennifer.
I mean, there's a new one from,
Yeah, apparently it changed. I have no idea what it changed. It changed 15 minutes after I read the old one, so I'm not sure how that is going to work. Anyhow, but that's very important.
And the best way for them to get in touch with,
Jennifer is just contact her at the town clerk's office, and she would be happy to, or if you're in the building, to swing by, but it's probably good to just make sure you know she's going to be here when you want to come.
but I'm in the database, so they should have sent me the update, and I've not received one.
Yeah, that's something I think you're going to have to take up with her. But at this point, for this committee, I just
No,
want to
they-
make sure
The
we're...
Secretary of State's office would be sending it to me.
Oh.
Because I have taken that
Yeah.
test.
I'll let you
numerous
take
times.
that up with the Secretary of State. Okay, so I also, because some of us have been around Burlington for a really, really long time, sometimes it's easy to go with the status quo, or because we did it before, or, we tried that before, it didn't work. There's all those kinds of things. I think we need to all just kind of clear that out of our brains and just be open to new ideas and new ways of thinking of things. In order to keep these meetings punchy and let's make sure we stay on topic, I think the parking lot will help. And if not, as chair, I will be managing it tightly. So forgive me in advance if I cut you off. We want to make sure everybody has a chance to talk. So let's make sure that even if we're not going around the room in a formal way, that you're aware of the fact if somebody is indicating that they have something to say and they haven't said anything yet, just back off, let them speak. The other side of that is, if you have nothing new to add, it is fine to pass. You don't have to say anything.
They're wrong, isn't it?
And, so we don't have to have people say the same thing. We really need everybody to volunteer for a committee or part of a committee, so we don't know what those committees are yet, but they're coming. And we want to ask that everybody come prepared to discuss the topics on the agenda. There will be pre-reading sent out to folks where we think it's helpful on whatever topic it is that we're going to be talking about. And that way we can kind of all learn at the same time, at the same pace. And the last, and I think really importantly, is that give feedback to Jess and me after meetings about what worked well and what didn't, because this is going to be an iterative process. We're a new group. I don't know if any of you, the old corporate thing about you're forming, you're storming, you're norming, and you're performing as how teams actually develop. Well, that's kind of what we're doing. So we're in the forming stage right now. So we just need to all be open to and share what you think your thoughts are.
oh, it looks like Jen Priest has her hand up online.
Okay?
John, can we request an unmute?
Let me just do one
Yeah.
last thing, and then we can. So next, what's happening next is we're going to hand the agenda over to, after we hear the question, to Pat Lloyd and Anthony Wilson, who are from the Collins Center. So before they start, and probably as we get the technology working for them, Jennifer?
Yep, I was listening in from home, and I just wanted to clarify, if you signed a form for this committee already for open meeting law, you do not need to sign a new form. I would suggest that you read the revised open meeting law that's been posted to the town's website. The state updated it on it just says June 2025. I just got it from the Clerks Association this morning, so it's been updated. Like Mr. Kelly has already signed his, he doesn't need to sign a new one, he just should read the revised open meeting laws.
Great. And,
All right?
okay, so Sally?
Are you ready?
Yep. Yeah, I think we're ready to switch.
So let me know
You
if
want
you
the
can.
mouse so that you could, do you want the
Not-
presentation up?
I can share from.
Oh, go ahead. I think we were going to have our discussion first, and then we'll start sharing.
Okay. Pat, just a reminder, you really need to talk loud and into here, or people can't hear you.
Okay, do you want me to try to?
Those are directional mics. You have to be within a narrow cone in front
I
of you.
was trying to share with Anthony, but I'll just move it
That's
over
gonna
when
be
it's his
tough.
turn. Okay. So we're starting out this process by asking the committee to give us some feedback on their experiences with town government. So we'll be asking the committee to answer 2 questions, which we've talked about and are on the agenda. This will be a fairly informal process. We invite other committee members, we invite the other committee members to ask clarifying questions, to explain the committee's members' responses, but we won't be looking for extensive debate or discussion on each item. We're really just looking for feedback. And our chair and vice chair are going to be collecting this information, and we can work it into our future presentations. We may work it in later this evening. So it's really designed to get a baseline understanding of what information and you're bringing to this committee as far as what your level of understanding of town government is and what's working and not working for you. So each committee member will have an opportunity to answer, including the alternates. So the first question is we're going to start with what is working well with Burlington's town government. And we may, if we could we minimize, well, I want to be able to see people's faces so that we can ask them to respond, if that's possible.
Okay. Do you want also to have your slides up?
We don't need the slides right now. It's more important to be able to see people so that we can call on them. Okay. So okay, great.
Do you want me to adjust the view? Let me see. Sorry. Let me see if I can. I hate WebEx. Sorry for any technology people who heard me say that. You don't want the slide?
I'll pull them up. I'll share from my WebEx on my computer.
Perfect.
Wonderful. So who would like to start us off? Has anyone prepared an answer to the question, what is working well with Burlington's town government?
My answer is it depends upon who you ask.
Wonderful. Let's start with, I see we have a hand up, and I'm sorry if you could, because your name isn't, I can't read it from here. Oh, it's Nikki. Hi, Nikki. If you could just state your name, tell us your name for the people who might be listening at home.
Sure. I'm Nikki Cadillac. I'm a member of the committee. I think Jack's right that it does depend on who you ask, but from my perspective, as somebody who's been following this for several years, I think that the town government has a reputation among people who have lived here for a long time of not being super proactive. I personally, from the back end, have seen it a huge shift in that in the last 5 to 10 years. And I think that the town is doing a lot in the economic development department and in other areas to be really proactive. It's sort of similar to, the planning in the 1960s and 70s to sort of set Burlington up to be a hub of commerce and retail and residential and like a place that people wanted to be. I think there's a new revolution of that kind of thinking happening, and so I think that's a really positive thing. And the problem is that not enough people know about that, and so that's going to be kind of my con or what's not working well. But I think I can hold that for for the next set of questions.
great. If I can just ask a follow-up, can you explain to me, what areas of town government are responsible for this shift to becoming more proactive?
I think overall, it has been a concerted effort of the Board of Health, the Select Board, the Economic Development Department, Town Administration. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. I'll give the water situation as an example. A lot of people were really frustrated with having water bans several years ago, and outdoor watering bans, which is happening right now because of the hot weather and stuff. But there was some contamination in one of our water sources. There was also new EPA regulations that were going to sort of count our drinking supply as contaminated, and the town was really proactive about getting the water filtered, making sure that the contaminated water sources were offline, and opening up a cross connection with the MWRA to make sure that we have enough water and enough safe water for the town to serve the town. And I think that that's just one example of really a lot of kind of cross collaboration and communication. Another example with the Board of Health and Economic Development is just bringing in life sciences, as the signals were coming that technology office space was going to be decreasing. Life sciences is a space where you need a lot of square footage and where you need people to be on site, and so more likely to have tenants to keep their rented, leased space, and so that was another kind of proactive shift. And I think. I hope that answers your question.
No, thank you. That's great. Before we continue on, does anyone have a question about what she mentioned? Okay. Who's next? I think you started would you like to respond? It's Jack, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
My thought is, why don't we have better participation in our local election? It averages a little less than 20%. That less than 20% is a symptom. I'd like to find out what are the reasons.
Okay.
Do they just don't trust government? They don't care? They don't want to be involved? They think it's just all run by the same old, whatever reason they may have, and they can be varied all over the board. I don't think there's one simple answer to that question, as simple as it sounds. I think it's a very complicated question, but I think it would help us to know the answers to that, because part of what our charter is, sorry I used the word charter, Betsy. Part of our job is to get feedback from the largest percentage of the town as possible, and I'd like to figure out how to do that.
That's great. That answer is wonderful. That may work towards the next question we have, which is what areas of town need improvement. Do you have any areas of town governance that you want to tell us about that you feel are working well? The strengths of your local government.
I think overall we're doing a pretty good job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of change for the sake of change.
Okay, great. So did you have a question on what Jack said, or you would like to contribute your contribution?
I would like to contribute.
What do you think is working well?
Yeah, on the front of elections, I do like the ease with which someone can request a mail-in ballot. I think that, making it more accessible, especially to our disabled residents, is an important part of democracy. And in addition to that, I've taken a look at another town who recently held a local election because I was trying to get my partner to vote. And so, looking at the candidates, all I saw were 4 Facebook pages. They're a town council form of government, and there were no debates. There were no ways to tell who was running for what besides, I looked on the local government website. I didn't see anything. What I really like about Burlington on that front is that you can quickly and easily see who's running for which seats, who the incumbents are, the attendance records of all the town meeting members, every single roll call vote at every town meeting. And that really gives voters as much information as possible if they want to make an informed decision come April. I think that's what I was going to say.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Okay, who's next who wants to talk about what's working well with the town? Is there someone online? And you don't all have to answer, but I might go around and check in with you all to make sure, when we're finished, to make sure you haven't reached anything. Yes?
I'll give it a shot. I'm Russell Miner. My family and I moved here about 13 years ago. And I've been a citizen, not involved with town government at all. And so I think, on the one hand, I don't want to get into anything that's not working well. What I think has been working very well, and it's part of what I wrote when I asked to be a part of this committee, was when I sat down and I thought about all the different ways that the services of the town had affected me. Everything from my kids were little when we got here, there were lots of activities going on, there were things that the rec department was doing, there were things that my wife could sign up with and have the kids go. There was always sort of a life that was happening in the town that I could see, and it felt like something was happening. Every day when I would drive out of town to go to work, you know, that construction sign thing that everybody uses for communicating was telling me, oh, that's great, something's gonna happen. There were signs up on the common, right? So it felt like a town that was alive and things were happening. I had emergency services come to my house when my son fainted. Hey, got to meet them. That was lovely. My father passed away. My mother had to move in with us, and all of a sudden, it was a very rushed thing. It was right before the pandemic, and we turned to the Council on Aging. And we got so much help from them, and still to this day, my mom goes to the Council on Aging quite frequently. So it's like another resource that just was amazing and wonderful. And whenever I mention these things to friends in other towns and things, they're kind of amazed. They're like, wow, how does this happen? As a citizen, I've been in other towns where it felt like things like property taxes were super expensive and a ton. I don't feel like I'm getting crushed by them and things like that. Again, maybe everyone has their own opinion, so that's fine. But I felt like this town always seemed to me like one that seemed pretty financially responsible, a mixture of business. So that's kind of speaks to the ideas we heard earlier about development and maybe making planning vision about how the town is going to fund itself. So for me, that was pretty amazing. And I think my other friends and things who I've talked to, we've all been pretty grateful with what the town offers for its services. So I think that's going well.
So you think that the town's doing a good job from a financial perspective in being able to provide the services that maybe some other towns aren't able to?
Not knowing any better, it appears that way to me. And also maybe it's more to clear out how does this apply to the town government? Obviously, some aspects of the government must be functioning well enough in order to be able to deliver these services in enough of a way that it feels like they're being delivered. Even the water being mentioned, the water being treated, and the whole thing being built in a pretty short period of time. That seemed great, awesome. Things are happening. There's a problem. Action is taken. It gets resolved. There are places where I'm sure that would take much longer and go on forever. So that felt good.
Great. Thank you. Yes.
I think town meeting works pretty well. I think the decisions it makes are generally good. I think people tend to, town meeting members tend to be reasonably well informed and active in the town. I can't say as I've agreed with everything, every vote, but I think in general it's done well, listening to financial issues and taking that into consideration. And I know some people will say it's unwieldy. It's not meant to be efficient, but it is meant to be effective.
Thank you. Great. Would anyone else like to contribute? Let us know what you think is working well for town government.
I would agree, Jessica Sutherland, I would agree with Bill. Actually, mine was going to be town meeting. I, first of all, am thankful. I mean, I'm not a town meeting member, but I am actually thankful that we have 3 town meetings. I think that has helped us as a town in many cases, whether as of late when it's been stuff that's coming down from the state, for us to be able to kind of be proactive in the conversation of being proactive, trying to get things through as quickly as we can before any state mandates come into effect. It allows us to make modifications pretty quickly if we see some things aren't working. It allows us to not feel like we have to, as of late, but this could change in the future, you never know, prioritize things because the agenda feels too cumbersome or too full. We can be a little bit strategic about when we present things because it is, multiple times a year. And I mean, I very much agree. I think town meeting members are, for the most part, very well informed. Although from a planning board perspective, sometimes it can be a little nervous because you're like, I don't know how they're going to vote on this. I'm actually grateful that you can't predict how the town meeting as a whole is going to feel about or vote on an issue, because it then really holds every type of board or individual or third party responsible in doing the best they can, making sure our meeting members are informed, making sure everybody is well prepared, because you never know. The littlest thing could be a soccer field could turn into a 3-hour discussion, or topics that you think are going to be bigger could happen pretty quickly. And I think keeping people on their toes to really present to their best strategic selves, I think is really important. I think that's what keeps this town very stellar in terms of the things that we do approve, and you can see why certain things don't make it through.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Yes, Betsy.
Okay. Well, most of the things I was going to say, everybody else took, but the thing that came top to mind was the Veterans Affairs Officer. It's an amazing service that is provided. We lived in another town for well over 20 years and never heard a thing from the Veterans Services people there. And we hadn't been here a month before we got something from them, and they just do a great job, and they offer a lot of the benefits to veterans that they don't even know are there, and it's very important. So that's one thing. I also think that we're really lucky, and this is not town government, but it plays into the communications aspect of it, is that when all the newspapers went bye-bye, or at least stopped printing in any serious way, we have the Buzz. And it has turned, I think, into be a real integral part of how the town communicates with its population. And I know it's not in a government function, but it definitely does a good job of helping people understand what the government does and explain things. I also think hybrid meetings. I think that I'm on one other committee that's 100% hybrid. I've been on a couple of them that have been very effective, and we can move things fast, and it's been really good. And actually the other one is 100% virtual, but having hybrid, being able to have people when they're traveling, so you're not missing, that their input is really good. So those are the things that nobody else picked up on that I want to mention.
Wonderful. Anyone online interested in participating? Let me just make sure. I believe some of you aren't here. I don't think Myrna is here. Greg Foster is not here?
Right. No, they're both not. Myrna and Craig.
Okay. Stephen.
And Carl Foss is not here.
Great. Okay. Anyone else like to answer this question? Before we move on to the next question? Great. But thank you. No, these are it's very helpful for us we will be feeding this into some of our materials that we will include later. So the next thing may be a little tougher to talk about, but I'm encouraging you to bring all of your thoughts and ideas, so that, because some of these things will be able to be addressed by this committee, and something that can be solidified or changed within the four corners of a charter, or perhaps a suggestion for a bylaw change. Some of these may require further study. Some of them just might not be something that's within the purview of this committee, but may be part of a recommendation for future study. So we encourage you to bring your ideas here, and we will be able to gather them and talk about them in the further down the line. So the next question is, what are the areas of your town government that you would like to see improved? Where do the challenges lie in your town government? Would anyone like to start? I think, does Nikki have her hand up? Oh, no, that's your move.
I don't, but I'm happy to start.
Okay, great. Please do.
I have heard about silos, and I want to hear more about that. I don't know enough about the inner workings of how the sort of town administration works to know about that necessarily. But my big thing, and the whole reason that I created the news organization that I did, is that communication and knowing what's going on is just really hard. It's tough to navigate the website. It's tough to know who to call for what. If I can't even come up with, like, if I need a chicken permit, maybe it's not super easy to figure out how to get a chicken permit, for example. I don't know if that's true or not. That's just the one thing that I came up with off the top of my head. But I think navigating through the different layers can be cumbersome, especially for somebody who's not really familiar with local government, and maybe somebody who's not from this country, or any other number of issues, or just maybe somebody who's really busy during the workday. I will say, maybe we can add this to the pros list. I really like that there is an option, a Wednesday evening option for all of the towns, the town departments to be open, because that does increase accessibility for some. But I think just in general, I have gotten the sense of, like, well, it's on the website, so I don't know what more to do, from a lot of different people. And I wish there was more, I don't know the answer, but I wish there was more open kind of communication and proactivity that did not involve reverse 911.
Thank you. Anything else?
From me, not that I can think of, but like I said, I did want to hear more about the idea of people working in silos and maybe duplication of effort.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Who else would like to respond? I think you started off with some challenges already. Does anyone else like to talk about some of these challenges?
I read the Natick study, and my reaction was, what the heck is wrong with those people? I don't think we have the type of problems they were describing.
I don't either.
So, and the other problem I had with the Natick study is, who designed that survey? How did they make it representative of the town?
If I could just respond to that. The Natick study is not something that that we're proposing we adopt, that it's
Oh, no.
relevant or any of that stuff. It is just an exemplar of how one place did it. They put together survey questions. Do I think they fit Burlington? No. But I think the concept of a survey, concept of focus groups, those kinds of things, is to prompt our minds and get us in the same place. That's a different town. As a matter of fact, it's a way different town than what we are. So don't misunderstand.
Oh, no, no, that was
Okay.
some information that was available. And it was one that the Collins Center worked with, so.
No, they didn't, actually.
Oh, you
That
didn't-
wasn't-
You didn't work
That was
with
not-
Natick?
No.
Oh,
No.
okay.
That was a different consulting group.
Oh, yes, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Would anyone else like to answer the question of some challenges they've had with town government? Yes.
Yeah. So on the front of the website, I would definitely say that it has been a struggle to go in and see like exactly what's going on. I'd imagine, for instance, if I wanted to, complain to someone about a street sign being in the wrong place or land being used weirdly or, local affairs, I wouldn't know what committee to go to. Now, this might exist, but I think the website having, say, like a list of all the committees and then brief descriptions of what they do, all in the same place, where people can just go in, Control F, type in like road or tree or something like that to get a good idea of where they need to go for which issue they might have. And I think that would result in better public engagement and, more citizens bringing things to the attention of government that aren't discovered months later. Additionally, on the Natick report, we definitely don't have the same problems as them. That's a given. I know that the average size of a town meeting is 214 in Massachusetts. Ours is 126. I know that they said a lot of the seats weren't filled and they have trouble getting town meeting members. We really don't have that issue. But something I do think we have is attendance problems. I believe our attendance hovers between 60 to 85%, depending on the night. Don't quote me on that. But, I do think either greater penalties for enough missed meetings or just some way of, otherwise holding town meeting members accountable to the basic premise of showing up for the thing that they were elected to do would make for a better Burlington.
That generated a question in my mind. Why can't our town website allow an AI question so the person who is not familiar with the website, and it can be difficult to maneuver sometimes, just have a place they type in a question and it directs them to right where they need to go?
So I will say, as
That's some technology that would be nice to have.
Yeah, definitely. So there is a misconception about AI. I'm a software developer typically, in that people think it just tells you the truth. No, it does not. AI, in its current state, like language models, like ChatGPT, they will take approximately what they see as a response to the answer, which happens to be correct some of the time. But it doesn't know what's going on. It doesn't know the facts. It just knows what the call and response is. So I do think an AI question bot would be helpful for the town, but I do think it would need to come with a disclaimer that, this might not be the committee that you're looking for. Your princess is in another castle.
So maybe we just capture that as a comment about taking advantage of more current technologies in our communications, because that's an example, AI. There are probably a bunch of others as well. And that way we could talk for an hour about AI. I just don't want to do that right now. So
My thought is if the AI's universe is limited to what's in the website, it can't run amok.
it can do a lot of things, so it can run amok. So we just need to be careful about, I think we just capture, as I said, let's just capture that we want to look at AI and other technologies to help the communications process. And then that would be a good subcategory for a subgroup to look at on communications, maybe later. So we'll come back to that at a different time.
So that's in the parking lot.
It's actually on the list.
It is parking lot.
It's on the list.
More current technologies, AI search results / chatbot.
There you go. All right.
Okay. Does anyone else have any new, different ideas? Yes. Bill.
Actually, kind of on what we've been talking about, civic engagement, in that a lot of people don't understand how town government works. What do you mean, what's a town meeting? I've told people, well, I'm the town moderator, and I get this blank stare as like, well, what's that? I run town meeting. Well, what's a town meeting do? And a lot of, I mean, it's basic to me. I grew up in a town that ran by town meeting, and my parents were active, so I understand it. But not everyone in town comes from Massachusetts, and they don't understand our basic form of government. And one issue I've seen with town meeting, and I'll just throw it out, is that we don't have many minority faces showing up in town meeting.
I would expand that beyond town meeting, because one of mine was not true representation of the town
Right.
in all facets of our local government.
I do, I think, have a relevant anecdote on that front. So in 2024, there were 8 people running for 6 seats. 2 of them were, I believe, Indian women with, non-English sounding names. And what I noticed is, despite one being an incumbent and one of them campaigning very hard, there was almost no difference in votes between the 2 of them, and they both lost by substantial margins. We also see significant name discrimination in elections. Now, enough people vote based purely on, which names seem familiar to them, that, that is a tough issue to really correct, because, these are elected people. But that would probably explain why, despite, for instance, the Indian population here being, I believe, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30%, to the best of my knowledge, they have very few members on the town meeting.
So I think we could capture that with lack of diversity on that, on it, and kind of move from there. And if we come back to that later, we can talk about more, a subcommittee or something can talk about how to increase that process in there.
I don't think there's a legislative solution for it, unfortunately.
Well, there might be tactics that will help on doing that, but let's not solve it right now, okay? Let's just keep brainstorming about what it is that we think needs to be improved.
Yes.
It might be echoing a little more of the civic engagement. Again, I'll speak only from my own experience. I didn't know anything about town government until I decided to stick my nose in, until I started reading The Buzz, until I discovered The Buzz. So even though I was participating in services that I thought were fantastic, I didn't know enough how they got there and what was causing them, and how they functioned. Now, some of that is human nature. People don't need to know everything. They're not going to dig into everything. I don't know that I looked at my last town to look too hard at their town government. But maybe we could do a better job of tying the benefits that people see with the structures that form them, with how their engagement is a part of that. I'm not trying to solve it, so I'm not going to go any deeper than that. On the sort of the same note, it's ultimately about educating the public about the nature of town government in a way that is relevant to them. A lot of times people only engage with town government when they have some problem. Oh no, I need a permit. Oh no, someone's complained to me, that kind of thing. But maybe there's more ways to continue to, sounds cliche, to reach out to people, but somehow tying it with the services that they're engaged with.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like some of the themes across the board include a desire for more transparency in communications and understanding the representation of the town and making sure people are being reached out to engage.
Just
Yes.
a couple of things I wanted to mention, and now I'm kind of looking at how we're organized more in terms of the town. I think that the span of control issue, we need to take a look at who reports to whom and that sort of thing, what seems to make sense. During the pandemic, there were people in the same building who had who, like, one department said, okay, you have to have somebody full-time in the building or working, and then another department was 100% work from home. So we're not one face to the customer, if you will. And I think having kind of human resource policies different for different groups of people in the same general category of employee is not a good situation. I think that needs to be fixed. And I think that, let's see, it's unclear to me who gets direction from whom. We have people, we have a town clerk, for example, who has no direct reporting relationship, not the current one, the prior town clerk. I said, who do you report to? And she said, I report to the voters of Burlington. Well, I don't think they're doing a performance review except for when they go to vote, but I think that career development, and there's a whole lot of things that go into developing an employee that we're going to want to have stick around and be the best that they can be. And that, to me, is not a good situation in terms of accountability and also job satisfaction for the people who are in it. I would suspect it could get somewhat frustrating. And I think sometimes collaboration between groups is more competitive than collaborative. And I think that we need to take a look at that and see what we can do and maybe structurally do some things to make it more, we're all in it for Burlington. I mean, everybody, I know everybody's heart's in the right place. And it should not be us and them, and it should not be fighting for kingdoms or any of that sort of thing. And somehow we need to structure it in a way that discourages those behaviors and encourages the collaborative behaviors. And in town meeting, I agree with the attendance thing, but I also am equally frustrated with the people who drop out during the course of the meeting. So we may start with 80%, and then I look around and half the people are gone. And again, people are there to do a job, and they're not doing it. And I think that is that I don't know I don't have any solutions. I just think that's a problem. I think the thing about town government for the average person who lives here is you don't need it till you need it. So many people have busy lives, kids, jobs, all the stress and strain of just making it through, going to the store, doing this, that, and the other thing, that it means that when you come in to visit, I need something, I need it now, we don't make it really easy for those kind of casual people to do it. And I think sometimes the departments aren't as tolerant of people not understanding how things work as they need to be. So there's an empathy factor that I think needs to be built into the job descriptions of the people who work there. Some people do it beautifully, other people not so much, and that goes for some of the committees and the boards as well, who sometimes I get frustrated, and I just think people need to be aware of that in terms of how they come across to people who are just coming in. And then one last plug for the Buzz, who people said who does what. I think I sent it out to everybody, the link to what Nikki had done that identifies all the committees and boards and talks in a paragraph of what each one does, and which probably would be a good idea somehow to get up on our website. But anyhow, that just a plug there. Anyhow, that's all I got.
If I might jump off the HR aspects as well, some of the things I wrote down is training and holding leaders accountable to mentorship. I don't see a lot of that existing within behind the walls. And on that aspect of career progression, documentation for successors, or God forbid something happens to somebody, it's non-existent. It makes kind of transfer power, if I use that phrase, very, very difficult. I think the HR aspect is a pretty big opportunity for our town. And then to kind of Nikki's point earlier on the silos, Betsy's point, there very much are hard lines drawn in the sand in terms of who should be doing what. Nobody should, like, this is my area of the sandbox, you stay over there. And I think we need to understand, I know there's a lot of history, there's a lot of backstory as to why that might happen. I know in some cases there's a reason for efficiency, but right now I think it's creating a lot of inefficiency for the town, and as well as possible confusion for the public. And so I think revisiting how do we better enable that collaboration without worrying about egos will be pretty important.
And then just one last thing that you prompted for me is time to hire, I think is a problem. And I think we need to get far more creative in the hiring practices so that we can bring in the best candidates for positions, and so that we don't promote people prematurely, which puts them in a very bad position, kind of Peter Principle thing, you don't want to do that. So, if we need to have a strategy on that front to bring in the best that we can find when we have these positions open.
One comment, I believe there is department head meetings which allow the various departments to find out where they need to work together or to eliminate the silo my territory type thing.
I don't think those are quite effective.
You don't think they're effective? Okay.
And we'll probably dig more into that. Okay, Pat?
Absolutely. So, that reflects a little bit of the themes that Nikki had brought in from the beginning, the siloing. She wanted to hear a little bit more about how that was brought about. So, thank you so much for your input, but I do want to just check in and make sure we haven't missed anyone who wanted to provide any additional input on challenges. And so what we'll be doing is compiling some of these things. Now, you're not expected to solve all of these challenges. You may look into them. Some of them are going to be appropriate for what we would put in a charter. Some portion of the charter may be affected. Some of the form of government, the structure of government may be affected. Other issues might be too granular for you to solve on your own, but you may make a recommendation in your report for further study on that. So this is all very helpful. Thank you very much. I just want to stop a moment to ask if Anthony had any comments or wanted to chime in.
I'm trying to make sure I speak into the microphone. No, Pat, that was sort of a good wrap to a nice brainstorming session where the committee, I always like to see the committee sort of put things on the table so that everybody understands where each other are coming from. Because at the end of this...
Can you speak up?
Yeah, because at the end of this process, it's really going to be...
Narrow cone you have to speak into.
I am saying it must be a line right to the mic. I would like to put forward to everyone that at the end of this, it's really going to be a process where you guys as a group come together, having learned a lot about your charter, having learned a lot about how the town government should work, and be putting forth the product of the committee. The only other thing I just sort of add to what Pat said is there is a difference between drafting the high-level document around the structure of your town government and the day-to-day management. This process isn't necessarily about sort of what happens on the day-to-day. It's about putting the structure in place so that you get the best type of management for your current form. So I just encourage the committee to think through that.
I think the only thing is that part of the thing the select board asked us to do was look at things like the role of the town administrator versus a town manager, which gets into structure and roles and stuff like that. So I think we just need to, that was a specific ask, so we're going to make sure that that stays on the table.
No, that's correct. And that would be fully appropriate for the charter. Yeah.
There's no difference between those titles anymore. It's what you hang on to them.
Well, I think, let's come back to that, because
We will. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a little bit when we get into our work plan. And, you know, there are traditional definitions that we'll talk about as well. But thank you. That's a good point. So what we'd like to do next is, actually, Anthony's going to bring it up on the screen. This is an example of a traditional work plan that we use to make sure that we cover all of the topics that are traditionally included in a charter and a broad form of government structural analysis. I'm not sure if you can read that. Can you make that?
load up.
So put that
You
in
can
the,
make it,
make things more visible.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I don't know if that,
Is there a way for the WebEx to be larger on the screen?
I don't know if you can use the mouse to click on the, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, if you get rid of the gallery on top.
I think you have the mouse.
You, them on the side.
I don't think we are driving that. He's
Sally, can
just,
you just bring up their presentation? I think that's probably, is that,
Be able to
does she have it?
click on it.
I think it's a word.
yeah, I mean, alternately, if you can see it better, well, that'll be the next step. Can you bring up the single standalone document that I sent over? It's called Work Plan. That looks like it, but,
Click back to the WebEx on the bottom.
That's the WebEx.
oh, okay. Well, oh, I guess he didn't put that up there. Okay, no, you only have 3 documents? Okay, it's not up there. So we plan on, we'll give Betsy a copy of this document to circulate to the rest of the committee to make sure that she has it as well. Basically, this is the Collins Center work plan. This is how we work through the creation of a charter. Now, along the way, your committee will also be engaging in additional interviews, surveys, et cetera, that will be put within the framework of this work plan. We're going to explain it in more detail. This is just the overview document that we'll show you. Fantastic. Thank you.
Sally's got it.
So this is in an order that we typically find is helpful to get the information we need. Now, this will be somewhat of a back and forth. You'll be getting input throughout this entire process. And we have sample amount of time to get through things. For example, legislative branch, 2 weeks. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to look at the legislative branch, you're going to be done. It's in 2 weeks, you're going to have it written, draft, ready to go. No, it means we're going to introduce the topic to you. But what I want to do first is kind of slide through the different areas just to talk about them. Legislative branch, select board, town administrator. Now, these are all designed to get the information necessary to be incorporated into a charter, which is that overall framework of many of different sections of your government. We've also incorporated a couple of public input sessions. That's not to say that the rest of the input is not important. We just like to kind of note from our perspective, it's good to get information fairly early on, and we have something between October and November, and then have another public input session once you have made some decisions and have some actual information to present to the public. So one is more of getting input and ideas like we did today, and the next one will be reflection on the work that you've done and getting additional input after you've done the work. So,
I could just add.
yeah, go ahead.
Just on the public input section, the way these work plans are structured for this type of work is you'll see that the first 5 items are really some of the things that most people will be most familiar with. Your town meeting, your select board, the town administrator. You know, there's a lot of parts of government that, you know, the regular citizen won't be as aware of, but these are the ones that people know the most about. To the extent that you codify anything or make any modifications, this would be the point for the community to let you know, hey, we feel a certain way about these changes or about how this has been structured, and we'd like to let you know so that you're not going forward in the process with something that ultimately won't pass muster at town meeting or at the ballot ultimately.
So are you saying during these public input sessions, you're asking for input on sort of how the decisions that we're making are shaping up by that point?
That is correct.
Okay.
And this is, and, you know, we put these on here because these are specific ones for the committee to have a meeting for the public to come in and to really tell you, hey, you've done this work, and here are our thoughts on it.
One of the topics that we've talked about with Pat is that there's another input that we feel strongly we need, which is the input from the data gathering sessions, you know, from employees, from members of the town meeting, et cetera, et cetera. That's not reflected here, and it would be kind of on the front end, so kind of give us some guidance. So that will have to get kind of blended into this. So if you will, maybe that's in September, we go for input from town meeting members, members of the staff here about what they feel. And I'm sure everybody here has feelings about what's working and what isn't, who actually is an employee of Burlington, and figuring out how we're going to tap into that body of knowledge from people who are in those jobs.
How do we balance the weight of the input, town employees, town meeting members, general public? We don't want one group to overwhelm it, do we? So how do we measure and balance that?
That's definitely something that you're going to be doing as you go along when you envision what are the issues that keep coming up. What are the issues the staff what keeps coming up with the staff versus what's coming up with the public. You're able to weigh, and you'll be talking about that. It will be interesting how much public input you get on different topics. It's very unique to each town, and that may be what you focus on. However, there's going to be certain areas that are more technical in nature. If you move something in the budget season, how does that affect town employees? Is that too early, too late, whatever? You're going to have technical information where the staff is going to provide the most direct, important information, but then you'll also have the public information as far as what is affecting to them. What are they reading about this? Is this transparent, et cetera? So the other thing I want to mention, and maybe this would be a good time, we actually have another presentation where we break these things down into a little more detail. So let's switch to that, because what I want to make clear is, yeah, great. We'll finish to the end of this. We talked a little bit about how the most familiar ones are up top. The ones as we go along, the next section will really be Finance Committee and financial procedures. That is something that can be very technical in detail, and will require some input from the Finance Committee, from the town administrator, so that we make sure that these processes are adequately reflected in a charter, and find out if they're working and if anything needs to be changed. Town elections is generally a very general section. Most of it is governed by state law, and it may just be reflecting what the state law is and providing basic information about dates and how you're nominated, et cetera. We will talk a little bit about resident participation mechanisms. Now, in a town, which is different from a city, where you're mainly talking about issues like, do you want to add a recall provision? Some issues like referendum and citizens petitions are already incorporated into your town meeting. So this is going to be the official mechanisms by which, how do issues come before the board, come before town meeting. That will be kind of in a town charter, balanced between this provision and what's happening in town meeting. Next, we'll talk about administrative organization. Let's see, did we miss, I feel like we missed a section, but in any event, I'm not sure if we put in, if we talked about, we missed the elected officials section. So there'll be a section where we talk about elected officials, including the planning board, school committee, et cetera. We'll be talking about this twice in the next presentation. So I guess we'll just skip down to the end and show you this, which we'll send to you afterwards. And next will be transition. At the end, when you've got it all worked out, if you've made any changes, we include a transition provision. And that's where you say, for example, if there's a change from how you're doing things, when and how will that be implemented? We'll dial in on that in a second in our next presentation. We have this going out to about July 2026. A year from now, you'll hopefully be finalizing a charter and a report. Then it will go for legal review, and then it will be submitted to the select board for consideration, for town meeting consideration. The timing of that, we'll talk about it more. We need to make sure that we're communicating with the select board of when they need information in order, and what town meeting they might put charter or bylaw information into. So let's go to the PowerPoint presentation. Oh,
Yeah, just
Go ahead.
briefly before we make that transition. The other thing that's, and it probably isn't as clear here in this work plan, is that the way we usually do things, now any committee can structure this type of work any way they want, but the usual way that we do these is that within each of these topic areas, we'll usually sort of do a sort of an educational memo with the committee and walk through the committee what this topic means in terms of both what's currently happening as well as that comparative analysis. And then when the committee starts to get a grasp on it and start to think about what it wants to potentially put down or commit to, then you will bring in internal members, that's your town staff, members of elected bodies, again, within their appropriate category area, hear from them before you fully commit to any item. So it's usually, during this process, we usually work in some of that feedback from the administration, from the government, while you're going through each topic area. That doesn't mean that someone's, a particular staff member or department is limited to one area. You may need to have them come in a number of times, but just that sort of implicit within the various topic areas. Because, so I just want to, so we'll get into this a little bit more when we go to the presentation, which is up.
great. So, yeah, originally we were just going to show you and talk about the different steps in our first work plan, but we decided we would dial down a little and show you a little bit more in your presentation. So if you want to go to the next.
I think they're sharing. You don't have to share, they're sharing.
Do you want me to share it?
Okay.
Or we're sharing.
There, I got it.
Oh, you're sharing it?
That's okay.
If it looks better when you're sharing it, maybe you can just give me the clicker and I can advance it as we go. I wasn't sure who was advancing it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. So we just want to dial a little bit into what's happening. The overview is the work plan we just gave you, it introduces typical elements of a charter. That is one part of the work that you're doing. You will be creating subcommittees to work on some of these other things that the committee is working on, looking at the different facets of town government and making other recommendations. But one of the products that you're going to be, one of the deliverables that you have is the creation of a charter. And so the work plan introduces these elements. Along the way, by topic, sections will be introduced and we'll have opportunities to incorporate public input. So this is a process that is, while you're also getting information about some of your other deliverables in a more specific sense, we can push them into understanding how things are working now. We can use that information in the outline of creation of a charter for you to break down some of these topics into more manageable bites. So sections of, as we mentioned, sections of a charter will be introduced. You'll have opportunities to incorporate public input that you have already received and to design strategies for additional input. So maybe you get through the select board section and say, geez, I can't really answer this question of what's in the charter without additional input. It will help you to go back and forth and design any additional input that you need. Stakeholders may be invited to provide meeting during these discussions and meetings or in writing at each relevant stage. Or you may have, alongside what Betsy was talking about, you may have a general survey that goes out to stakeholders in general to get their general opinions, but then you'll need them to come in to provide specific answers to questions during some of your meetings as well. So we will, during this, we'll inform you of some charter options and present examples of draft language. So for each topic that we talk about, we will inform you what you have now, what some of your options are, give you some draft language, and allow you to take a look at it, all the while getting your input, getting input from other stakeholders and residents. Our work plan really provides, it's an overarching view. It's a big picture look of the information gathering and decision-making process. And as we go along, what we'll do is we'll work on a section and we'll move forward. And if we need to go back at the end and revisit language in each section as the public input is gathered, or after you have a public forum and you see an issue that you really don't feel you're going to have the support of the public on, and you want to make some changes on it, or you want to tweak it a little bit, you can come back and do that. Next. Okay. This is a sample charter, modern charter table of contents. Now, we are going to give you some groups of charters that we think might provide helpful information. They have been written everywhere from, over the last century. So they are in different formats. There's different organizational styles. That doesn't mean they don't have excellent content. But we find that this sample table of contents is a modern way that cities and towns are organizing their charters, and it's helpful to include. Not all of them have 10 articles. You may not need all of them, but this is how we're organizing our material so that we can go through and see what you need, what you're using, what's good, and pull things from other charters that are working.
I would just add that, it probably looks very familiar, is that we structure the work plan around really these are the topic areas in the work plan. So you're seeing the same thing in a different order because we approach them differently in the work plan. So next.
Great. So the first topic we're going to talk about is the legislative branch. So what does that mean? We're going to be talking about town meeting functions. When are your meetings? What are the composition in terms of town meeting members? Who can serve? How you make
Existing charter. That's the language in our existing charter.
Exactly. And so the example on the side is Anthony pulled some language in your special act. So you're governed by a couple of legislative special acts. One governs your town meeting. It's where your town has decided to become a representative town meeting. He gathered some information from that. So the language that would be in a modern charter, it would be different language, but we would be pulling the structure from the special act, talking about it. You can let us know how it's working for you. It's fairly standard. So that's an example of some of the language that you have that would be incorporated into a full charter with all of the topics discussed.
If I could just add to that, Pat. So we've got a couple examples as you go through the slides. I think as we go through, you sort of pay attention that there'll be different citations to different special acts and different even bylaws from your current bylaws. One of the benefits of the charter, as I'm sure Pat told you at the first meeting, was around consolidating these organizational items into one document versus having to search through a variety of special acts, bylaws, and other items. In fact, as I was pulling this up, there's a number of special acts relative to town meeting. There actually was a lot over the last 10 years. So, depending on what topic you're looking for about how your particular town meeting runs, someone may maybe have a hard time sort of finding that sort of thing in terms of knowing where to do their research. So that's just at a high level one of just general benefits of the charter. And then the other thing I'll just point to is, it's when we send you the sample charters, they're relatively large documents. They usually range from 20 to 40 pages. I know people can get overwhelmed by that, but I always like to tell committees, we don't always have to make up all of the language whole cloth. You've got some places where we can sort of crib from and take the language from some special acts if you're not making any changes. Now, if you are, this can be the basis, and then we can add some changes where appropriate. But you've got some places even already relevant to Burlington that you can pull the language from and plug into this new charter document.
Yes.
It feels as though there's sort of two mandates for this committee. One is to come up with a charter, and that, in my mind, and again, I'm only going to speak for myself and how I'm visualizing this, but maybe it clicks with people, it's like write a constitution for your town. Be forward-thinking. Don't be narrow-minded. Be broad. Think of the big picture. Be specific where you need to be. Who are the terms? How long? How do you vote? All that kind of stuff. Refer to the right laws, et cetera. But consolidate the information. All right, there's that. There's another mandate which is around maybe proposed changes based on how people feel things are working, the town feels things are working. It feels as though almost those are two very distinct tasks in the sense that the first, one mission could be just take the sample charter, write it down with all the different pieces we've got everywhere to put it in one place as close to exactly the way things are right now, and look at that and say, okay, this is what you would have had if everyone wrote it at one time. This is what it would look like. And then starting from that, consider changes and move forward. Whereas I think you guys are proposing or your typical methodology is you consider changes as you evaluate each section. Is that accurate?
To some extent, that's the same thing. We don't give you the whole pre-made charter up front because that would be overwhelming.
Right, sure. Fair.
So we go a section at the time. We will, tell you what you have. We may even come in day one with draft language if we're certain that this would be it, and look at it from that direction. But it's although there's two ways of doing it, we're going to go section by section so that you're not overwhelmed and so that you understand where things fit in the topic. It helps us stay on track and make sure we have all the information we have going forward. But at the same time, within each section, we'll start talking about what changes might be made to fit the concerns that you're bringing to the table and that public input is bringing to the table.
If I may, your summary is well put and well summarized and articulated. I think to your question of the chunks versus in totality, can that be a starting point of, because to your point, I'm not surprised because that's how a lot of the documentation is, the information's all over here. So I think people's brains work differently. Some people like to look at it, chunk by chunk. I personally like to look at the big picture and then take it chunk by chunk. So is there an opportunity to have that consolidated, this is what your charter today looks like in totality, but keep in mind we're not gonna address this all at once. We are gonna then go into it chunk by chunk by chunk. Is there an opportunity to approach it that way?
Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, we definitely can send you all of the special acts that we currently have sort of pulled together. I don't remember if they already have that or we didn't already send
We
that.
do have that. We haven't sent.
Yeah, and we usually send, and we can do, it varies, but we could send you here's some communities and their charters that we think are relatively similar. They might change by topic, but just generally, we could send you, it's usually about 5 or 6, 7 or 8, something like that. We can send you that, and we can send you all the special acts. I can, like you said, every community is different, and every person's different. So I would say that usually it's hard for people to wrap their minds around that level of information, but we can send it to you and you can sort of peruse it at your own time. What we'll do as we go through the sections is we can, what we usually do is we sort of say, if we're in the legislative section or in the town meeting sections, we'll pull the relevant language from the various documents in the universe. But, I do find some people, to your point, is, you can go back to your house and say, well, we're looking at these, they pulled out this language, but I want to look at, the whole section or whatever. And so the short answer to your question is yes, we can send you what we've currently got, and it's always a dialogue about what do you guys think are the best comparators and things like that. So we can send you the special acts that we have, we can send you the comparator charters, I think relatively soon, probably before the next meeting, if that's what the committee wants.
If you're talking about what we do plan on doing is showing you where you're at now in many of these things, because you do not currently have a charter in this format, and you don't even have some of the information readily available yet that we would include in a charter. We have some of the basic information, so we can't draft the charter until we go through the process with you and find out, okay, so you have these bylaws, you have this special act. When exactly is the budget due to this department? What are we going to write into the charter about this? We need to go through this process with you and get the information. We can only take so much from the special acts and bylaws that we see. We need to understand and have the same conversations with your town administrator and maybe with the town moderator and with these different people in order to even draft this document.
Okay.
That's why we don't just give you a charter and say, here you go, look at it. We need to go through the same information with you.
To that point, and I understand that feels reasonable to me, when you're talking about giving us samples of charters, I think before you said there are like lots of examples, some are really old and antique language and all of that. I think given the fact that Focus is our friend here, it would be good for you to give us examples of charters for comparable communities.
Right.
I think it doesn't help us to look at the city of Boston. It doesn't help us to look at, Vineyard Haven, Massachusetts. I mean, that, it's like something that's comparable to Burlington so that we can spend our time going through that and absorbing it so that we can be, I think, more productive. And if there's, 2 examples, that's great. But I want to limit that so that we can focus on what we need to focus on and use that as an example, but not get distracted by things that aren't relevant for us.
Absolutely, and we've already collected a number of what we would consider comparable communities that we will be providing you charters with probably before the next meeting. So you'll absolutely have a small section. We're not going to give you the city of Boston, or in general, cities and towns. We're not going to be giving you any city charters, but we have some that we've chosen that have been the relative population size, relative form of government. Now, each one is going to be different. You have some unique qualities about Burlington that will need to be reflected in your charter. You might have more elected officials. You might have, that we will actually have to go through with you and work through those things, but we have a number already selected that will make sure that you get to take a look at charters. Okay. So, for example, in the legislative branch, we spoke briefly about a lot of this is going to come right from your special act. Some of it is going to come from your bylaws as well, but this is going to be in kind of a skeleton outline of your legislative branch and your town meeting, the role of the moderator, the clerk, who are standing committees, how warrant articles are processed. There will be there will be this overarching structure that we're going to provide in your charter, but a lot of your bylaws are not going to change because they provide some of the details and workings of this. Some will be transferred over because they're more broad and overarching, and some of the details you're going to want to keep in your bylaws, and we'll talk about that, because every time you need to change a charter, it's a more difficult process than changing a bylaw. So many of the more granular details are going to be contained in the bylaws, but you're going to want to have this frame of reference where people can take a look at it and say, geez, what is town meeting? As you said, what is town meeting? How is it defined? Who is this town moderator? That's going to be in a charter. Okay. The next section is going to be, we're going to start focusing on the executive branch. The town bylaws talk a little bit more about the select board than your special act. Your special act really is about the legislative branch. So the select board section will be talking about what is a select board member, how many are there, what are their terms, what are their powers and duties, who do they get to appoint, what license, are they the licensing board? How do we fill a vacancy if somebody leaves? What if somebody leaves town? What does that mean? So that's going to be the basic structure that we're going to talk about. And we have included here just a little bit about what you have in the town bylaws. One of the appointment powers is that the select board is permitted to appoint a town administrator, and that type of information about the duties will be put in the executive section. Okay, you can move on.
Are there any questions?
And please feel free to stop me if you have questions. The executive. The next section, we really are going to pull out and focus on for a few weeks. It's because you have this specific mandate to look at your town manager duties. Those are included in a charter. The overarching town manager duties or town administrator duties are going to be listed, not the granular duties, but the general powers of a town manager or a town administrator are going to be listed in a charter. How are they appointed? What qualifications need they have? What are their powers and duties? Who do they appoint? What are their roles in budgeting? Other financial and administrative duties. Something that's also in a charter is always what happens if the town manager isn't there? How do we install an acting town manager? How do you fill a vacancy? So this general information will also will dial down. And when we talk about this, this is one of a couple of places in the charter where this organizational structure, you have a chart, you have an organizational chart that I believe Betsy sent out. We're going to start talking about that and taking a look at that and say, does that make sense? Is there something that something that you want to change, what's not working or working about that chart, because that may affect what you talk about when you talk about a town administrator or a manager appointing. Who did they appoint? What sort of select board oversight of those appointments is there? We'll be talking about that in that section.
Pat, can I just add a little bit here? And I'm just adding, reflecting on, I think, a comment earlier about the terms town administrator. I think someone said something about town administrator, town manager. The terms may not have the same meaning. Just to put a little bit of flesh in that, there's no legal definition in, well, there is, but there's not a legal necessarily firm distinction that says if you use the terms town administrator, they have these powers. If you use the word town manager, they have these powers. Where, like, if you see the example, and this is actually common in a lot of charters, is that you'll say the town administrator or town manager is the chief administrative officer, and then there's usually a fairly extensive enumeration of powers and authority, as well as whom they have the authority to control. And really, that's where you'll see what's in that enumeration really says we've got a strong, centralized town administrator / manager, or we've got a weak town administrator who and I would say just broad category-wise, a weak town administrator, not to say that they're not doing a good job, but just to say that they generally would fall in the category if they're not doing a lot of appointing or discipline or anything related to employees, things of that nature. So if they don't have really direct control over who gets hired, terminated, or disciplined, to the extent that you limit that, that's really going to put that person into that category. And often charters will give town administrators / managers broad hiring authority, but maybe exempt certain positions. Some common ones we see are the police, the chief of police, the chief of the fire department, things of that nature are sometimes pulled out and report directly to the select board. So I just wanted to add a little bit there based on the previous.
Anthony, are there generally accepted job descriptions that differentiate between those two positions? And I don't know if masshire.org or one of them. I mean, it feels like there is a standard, like with, you're doing compensation analysis, you always get the job title, it gives the description of functions, and then you can see what the salaries are. And it feels to me like the difference between an administrator and a manager is, there is a difference in most organizations, and I'm just wondering if there is, and if you could find one so that when we get into this discussion, again, I don't want to discuss it now, but when we get into this discussion, I think we need to start with that, kind of what is the benchmark descriptions for those positions, so that we can make sure we're doing apples to apples on the comparisons.
Yeah, what we usually do is we usually pull out the town administrator section from the charter so that you see, and you'll see sort of this person has a lot of, or this position has a lot of power versus that. I don't know, Pat, we probably can pull some job descriptions, although
Right.
I would say job postings are not as,
Job description, yeah, I'm not really talking job postings so much as there's like standards of how you, and I'm coming from a corporate perspective, so excuse me for that, but you have different levels of responsibility, and with those levels of responsibility, the titles escalate, right? So there's got to be kind of something in between an administrator and a manager having nothing to do with the competence of the incumbent. We're not talking about the incumbent here, we're talking about the role. So, when you look at the role of something called an administrator, this is what it is traditionally, and you're looking at a town manager, and this is what it is traditionally, and we can then we can say, okay, in many organizations and towns that this is what it is. At least it'll inform our discussion here as we get into it, so that we can have an educated discussion on that.
I'm also on the Collins Center Class and Comp team, so I understand exactly what you're saying. I will say that there's probably no standard. We can give you an example of both, but the job descriptions for town manager and administrator are so specific to what is permitted by the charter or by the Town Manager Act or the Town Administrator Act that was adopted, that there's no standard, and there really is a spectrum of duties. We can give you a couple of examples for sure, but I don't believe that there's not going to be a clear dividing line between this is what a town manager looks like and this is what a town administrator looks like. But we're happy to pull together some examples, especially from the charters that we're showing you, right? And you may say, well, this charter resulted in this kind of a job description where this charter results in this type. So that might be helpful to you. And that's a great suggestion.
What might make it easier is if you list, whether it be town manager or town administrator, the different levels of authority they have in the different communities.
Right.
And so it's not specific to any one town manager or town administrator, but these are the authorities, because I know at different towns, the line is blurred. Some town administrators have more power than others, and some town managers have less, which is, you warned us at the beginning, be careful of the label, because the label doesn't tell you exactly what we're looking for.
Right.
So if you can list the authorities, the powers that they have.
Absolutely. And when we do some of the, comparative analysis of some of the different communities that we look at that are similar in, size and to Burlington, we can pull those out for some of those communities. And we'll be looking at things like who is appointing department heads? And that's going to range from, are department heads appointed exclusively by the town manager, or are they appointed by the town manager with the approval of the select board each time? There's a whole range of options, and we can pull out some examples of which cities, which towns have what types of authority. That is absolutely something that we can help you with.
And I think the comparators we already have, although we're not in this section yet, but I think the comparators we have, there is a mixture, as you look at those different charters, there's a mixture of managers or administrators with different levels of power. So when we get into that section, we can definitely sort of, I would say, in terms of, for the analytical purpose of the committee, you probably want to think of the label in terms of strong town administrator manager or weak town administrator manager. that would be sort of a more firmly descriptive label, just in terms of as you're analytically putting it. And then I can just, to be very honest with you, some communities, as they go to a stronger sort of administrative officer, whether they use the term manager or administrator, sometimes the labeling is more reflective of the political environment than of the actual role that the person's doing.
Well, why don't we move on? I think we
Okay.
made our point.
So let's just move on to the next section. The next section, we'll be talking about elected officials, including the planning board, the school committee, et cetera. You have a number of elected boards in your town. We can talk about all of them. Doesn't mean you have to change anything about all of them, but we're going to talk about them. And that's going to, the information that is going to go into a charter will be for elected officials and elected boards will be the composition of those boards and the terms of office, the basic duties. Many of these have statutory duties. Some charters have discussion of how compensation is set for these boards, if any. We'll talk about that. We'll have a discussion. We have an entire framework for a discussion of elected versus appointed boards. It doesn't mean you have to make any changes, but we're going to talk through the kinds of things that you want to look at when we make recommendations. We don't make the recommendations, but when you want to talk about, should this position still be elected? Maybe this position should be appointed? We have a framework that will walk you through for that. So as an example, we mentioned how in the Acts of 2007, there's some information, as you said, we might pull into this. What happens, with these elected offices? When will they be declared vacant? What happens if someone moves out of the town? How long can they stay in these offices, et cetera? So that's an example that I believe we pulled from the Acts.
Pat, just one quick question. In that section, do you get into the interrelationship with other town bodies?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm not sure I
In
understand.
that section, do you get into the interrelationship, the connections that they have with other town bodies?
Yes. You mean,
Like, because we're talking about silos and the rest of it, so
Absolutely.
this is a place where maybe we can bring
absolutely.
together?
Absolutely. We'll talk about what their duty, and we'll look again at the organizational chart.
Okay.
So you can take a look at that.
Good.
Who's working together, what duties they might have. We'll talk about that here for the elected boards.
Okay.
Next section. Okay. I combined the next two sections together because the finance portion of a charter is really something that's a modern charter includes. It's not always laid out in your special acts, et cetera. But what you really want to talk about is the role of the finance committee, the process for going through your budgeting process from beginning to end. And this is the part where it will be very helpful to bring stakeholders in to say, what is the process of creating a budget? Let's document your calendar year in the charter so that people understand where this is coming from. This is a section where often people want to put in, let's talk about requirements for public meetings or forums along the way when you're talking about transparency. How does the budget proceed through? At what points are the public invited in to talk about the budget?
Is this Ways and Means? Is that what
Yeah.
the Finance Committee is?
Yeah.
Okay, so in Burlington speak, that would be Ways and
Ways and Means,
You might
right.
reflect it that way.
Thank you.
People will know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Thank you. And you're also going to want to talk about your capital improvement program and the general outlines of where this is coming from. So you have one document. It's not going to flesh out the details. It's not going to say, oh, you have to, be down to, what is the last service date of your fire truck. That's not going to be in the charter, but we'll talk about the structure of how things move along through the process. Okay. The next section, and it can be here, we might include this, some of it is going to be in the town meeting section, specific procedural mechanisms for resident input. One big example of this is whether you want to permit recall elections and whether you want to recommend recall elections. That's one section. Many of your other opportunities, like your referendum and stuff, your referendum after town meeting is going to be included in your town meeting section. The way citizens get a petition onto the warrant is going to be included in the town meeting section. But this section will talk about these participation mechanisms, whether you're interested in having them, thresholds for recalls, et cetera. Next, administrative organization. Now, this is going to be a discussion of how do you organize the town into departments. This will further our discussion when you're talking about siloing, et cetera. Who creates a department? If, for example, and I'm not using this as a specific example, but what if best practices change and Parks and Recreation should not be under DPW, but should be a freestanding, department? I'm not using you as a specific, but this is what some of the things that are talked about. Who makes those decisions? How do we decide how a department is created? At the same time, the rest of the administrative organization that we're going to talk about are appointment processes for boards and committees. That's in this section as well. So generally, the current practice is to outline, is not to outline the specific makeup of departments and appointed boards here in the charter, but to put them in bylaws so that they can adjust to best practices and standards as they go along. So you're not going to necessarily list every appointed board in your charter, but you're going to talk about who appoints these boards, what does that mean, who has to approve the appointments, what is the process for that, who can be on these boards? Is it residents on these boards? Do you have to be a voter, et cetera? Where we can talk about those issues here. What are the requirements for the appointed boards? Okay. The general provisions, it tends to be legalese for the most part, but one of the things that is included now more and more often is you want a method and a timeline for updating the charter. So once a charter is drafted, if it passes through the legislature, there needs to be a mechanism where it's reviewed periodically. We often see recommendations of every 10 years. You should sit down and review the charter. And at the same time, we also include recommendations for how often should you review the bylaws. That may be a shorter time. It may be every 5 years you should sit down and review the bylaws. So we're going to talk about that include these general provision sections. There may be some information as, how do you count days under the charter? If something is, less than 7 days, do you count individual days? Do you count weekends? So there's that kind of legalese is going to be in this general provision sections as well. There may also be some procedures for multiple member bodies. You may decide to pull together some of your bylaws. There may be, every year the committee has to meet and elect a chair. There may be some provisions that you want to include in this for multiple member bodies. Okay. The transition section, as we talked about, is going to outline when the charter takes effect. Usually in your transition section, you convene a bylaw committee. You say within, 6 months of the enactment of this charter, a bylaw committee, or usually sooner than that, but within 6 weeks of the enactment, we will establish a bylaw committee, and they have 6 months or a year or whatever to recommend any changes in bylaws to be consistent with the charter. So, and it will outline kind of a timetable for implementing changes. There's also a section in it that will talk about special acts that might have to be repealed or partially repealed as a result of the charter. And what's not included in here, but transition sections very often will include language about recommending or requiring a study committee for areas that you're not necessarily going to get to, but you may have a study committee because either you are not ready to move to that, but you want some more information about a study committee on, on a number of things, on communications, or a study committee on certain areas that you think need to have further action, but that you're not prepared to take at this time. So that's included in the transition section as well. It gives you an opportunity to request further information on certain areas, even when you're finished with your charter. Okay. So, and as we talked about the general process, but that's the information that we're going to gather, and along the way be plugging in input from you and from other stakeholders. So that's going to be the work plan going forward. But I haven't heard a lot of questions. I've only heard a few questions along the way. Maybe I didn't stop often enough. But did you have any questions for us on this approach and the work plan? Okay. Great.
Yeah, I'm still hung up on the doing it with chunks. What Russ brought up and Jess touched on kind of worked the way my brain works. If I need a charter course, I have to know where I am before I can chart a course. And by getting to see all of the disparate parts of our government put into a sample one place, I think is what Jess was hinting towards and the question Russ raised. I still would like to see that. Then we can take that and break it into chunks, but we can see the other chunks while we're working on one chunk. So I don't want to do each chunk in isolation. That's kind of the way my brain works.
I absolutely hear that. And one of the things we talked about, one of our first steps is going to be giving you like a broad overview. It's not going to look like a charter, but it's going to be a broad overview of your form of government and what it looks like. And hopefully that will
With
help.
an index similar to the charter index?
It depends how high level it is. It will, we can do a
Tell us
table.
where to find it in a current structure.
Right.
So I guess I wonder if the next meeting that we have, I'm assuming that you're going to take us through kind of how, now we're going to start diving into it with kind of however you approach this traditionally with your clients. I understand, I do think we need to have a good understanding of where the end point is going to be. I don't think any of us understands where we have special acts and where we have bylaws as it relates to each of these different things that we're going to be talking about, nor do we understand what they say today. So to put them all together would be, I think, exceptionally helpful as we enter each of those discussions so that we can see what we have today. We're not going to be limited by it, but at least we understand it. And then as you lead us through, kind of what the competitive world looks like, and then we can put in like what we're hearing from other people and all the rest of it, we start to integrate all these other things, which needs to come into that. I just, it's feeling to me like there needs to be that step in order to make it kind of real for people, and maybe I'm...
Isn't that what they're proposing? Where, let's say the next session was legislative, is that what you said you start with? Then you're going to come or have distributed material ahead of time, I imagine,
Yeah.
that is summarizing where the town is today. And then through the process of examining that, gathering input about the legislative structure, et cetera, we would then work through how do we get to a place where, okay, this is what the section of the legislative structure would look like potentially in this future charter. Is that accurate?
It is, but we also plan to do an overview of upfront of, all of the branches of government, so you just kind of have an overview of what your government looks like. It won't be, so you can have we'll start with a snapshot of your entire government and then go into the legislative.
I think
I think what we should do is give it a shot. This is when we're, talking about being flexible, and, I mean, we're a new committee. We're all dealing with a topic that we know something about or nothing about, and we're going into a process that none of us know anything about. So, I think we need to at least do the first one, kind of, have you lead us through it the normal way, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, and we find that we need more perspective, a bigger picture, whatever it is, we can come back and give some feedback, say, okay, we just did that one, now what worked, what didn't, kind of do a little postmortem on it, and then figure out how we adjust, because we have a lot of things to go through, so we'll have plenty of time to adjust as we need to as we go through this process. So if people are comfortable with that approach, and we go into next meeting with taking the information that they're going to supply to us to read beforehand for that, to prepare us for that step, and then we'll go through it and see what we think. Does that sound like it's a reasonable approach? Yeah?
Yeah, I'll know when we're there.
Huh?
I'll know when we're there.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Till then, I don't.
Okay. So that brings us, if we look at the time, we're at 8:39. I don't think we really had a time frame for this, but I think we've hit all the topics that we wanted to hit tonight. Our next meeting is on the second Tuesday of, is the 22nd of July, right? The 4th? The 4th Tuesday. Please, we'll send out whatever is sent to me. We have, Michelle is going to be doing the minutes for this. We've captured the brainstorm stuff, and so we'll be sending that out as well. And if you cannot attend for any reason, just shoot me an email. And I just want to remind everybody that when you see something come out, like I send you something, do not do a reply all and give me your opinion to share with the group, because that's considered part of the
Violation of the open meeting law.
So, I know in many of our lives doing reply all is like a natural reaction. Just please don't in this situation. Is there any other business that we need to take care
Are
of?
we going to get an invite to Facebook, or we have to go searching for it?
Burlington Government Review Committee.
Okay.
Burlington Government Review Committee. It was created when the last version of this committee was created.
And what I'll do is I'll ask our Michelle to put the link in the minutes. So by saying this right now, Michelle, I'm asking you to put a link in the minutes so that people can have access to it. And
Will the minutes also be up on the website with the other committee-related things that I've seen on the Burlington Town website?
yeah, they have to be posted, so those will be posted. The other thing is that, that John Denizio shared with me is there's a shared drive. At the moment, I don't understand who has access to it or who doesn't, but we'll see. And I am also on Google Drive challenged, so
I'm
we'll see.
assuming you need a burlington.org email to access it.
Okay. Then that's-
But we can get you one. We should get you one.
No, it's shared and viewable by anyone.
Yeah, so, right.
Care.
Yeah, so anyhow, we're going to work on the technology here to make sure everybody has access to everything that they need. And we're going to put links in it, like click here to get there, so people don't, so we can make it as simple as possible for people who are maybe not as computer savvy as others. Is there any other business that we want to take care of? Have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Anybody opposed? Figured it was the easiest way to do it. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.